Hey guys, so I just wanted to share my process of making Dream's Helm from the Sandman series. I first start off by planning out the shapes. Drawing them helps me brainstorm what base shapes I need to work with. The mask is quite big, so I'm wrapping a mannequin head with material to get the main shape of the mask, which is kinda alien-like or egg-shaped. Once I'm happy with how I layered the materials, I wrap it in cling wrap and tape it down with masking tape. I'm adding a few layers of tape so it holds its shape so I can figure out the pattern. This is the pattern I came up with. There's probably a better way to do it, but this is the one that worked for me on that day. I cut it out, made a mirrored pattern for the other half and used contact adhesive to glue it together. I then trimmed the edges to make it look more like the shape I need. Once I was done with that, I went in with a heat gun to curve the sides in more. I added an extra piece of foam to secure the shape. I then planned out the shape of the mouthpiece and the first layer of the eye panels. I'm using newspaper to get a rough pattern of the eye panel. Once I have the panel cut out, I'm sticking it down with contact adhesive. My contact adhesive is a bit dry, so the seams look questionable. I then added the second panel to the eye. After that, I cut out a thin strip of foam to shape the frame of the lenses. For the mouthpiece, I cut out a thicker straight strip and add a triangle piece of foam to get it in the right shape. I'm cutting off some excess foam so it can sit more flush against the mask. I also cut out the excess parts of the eyes. I then glued it down and joined the bottom part and added another piece of foam to shape it. For the detailing at the back of the mask, I cut out one tapering piece of foam and one thinner piece, gluing them parallel to one another and adding smaller pieces between the two. I then cut out base shapes for the spine mouthpiece, layering bigger and smaller pieces and angling some of them so there is a curve. This was a super long process. I refined the shape a bit better by carving it out with a carpet knife. I also made this extra piece to attach the spine to the mask, but I'm keeping the two parts separate for now so I can work with it easier. I used a Dremel tool to refine the shape a bit more. I then went in with the heat gun to melt it a bit and get rid of the foam shavings sticking out. I then had to reinforce the spine with wooden sticks so it doesn't move too much and crack the paint once it's done. Once the base of the spine is done, I added foam clay to shape it more accurately. I would suggest using Cosplay foam clay, but I'm just using some extra clay I had lying around at home. If the clay is too dry, you can mix a tiny bit of water in to make it smoother. You can also put some water on your hands and smoothen it out after you've placed it. I added another strip of foam to the mouthpiece and then used the heat gun to smooth where I glued the foam terribly. I then add some clay to the gaps as well to try hide the seams. You can save time by just gluing it better from the start. I then sculpted the first layer of the mouthpiece with some clay. To make the weathered leather details, I add small pieces of clay on the mask, then smear and tear it a bit. I'm adding an extra piece of foam to extend the back of the mask. I curved the bottom of the mask too much, so I cut out some extra pieces of foam for the side to bulk it up so I don't have to use too much clay on the sides. Once that is stuck down, I add the clay to it. I textured it with a brush to give it a bone texture. I then also added more clay and texture to the spine piece and another layer of clay to the mouthpiece. I then sanded down where I fold with the clay. I didn't have extra thin foam, so I had to make the middle eye panel by making an indent on the one layer of foam. To do this, I used a soldering iron, which was extremely messy, so I would not suggest using it for something like this. To try smoothing it out, I sanded it down, then heated it with the heat gun and tried smoothing and shaping it with the ruler. When I was done shaping and sculpting, I painted it black with acrylic paint. I then also painted the spine black, so I have a nice base coat to work on. I then added some more of the weathered leather detailing. I just tried to smear and tear it in random shapes so it looks organic. For the rivets, I used 3D craft glue. This glue retains its shape and doesn't flatten when it dries. While that was drying, I started painting the bone color onto the spine piece. I would usually dilute acrylic paint, but I found some craft paint in the color I wanted, which ended up being very diluted. This worked in my favor for layering the paint, so I put a bunch of layers on. Once I finished that, I added the final layer of clay to the mouthpiece and painted the bone color onto the sides and back of the helmet as well. I then used metallic paint for the silver parts of the mask. I also mixed some darker metallic paints to dull it down a bit, and then I moved on to making the panels look like old leather but still keeping it quite dark. I then added some highlights to the weathered leather. I also added highlights to the mouthpiece and other metal pieces to give it some contrast. I made some pastel shavings to brush onto the shadowy areas of the mask to also give it a bit of contrast. This works best on a matte spray coat. For the eyes, I cut up a thin plastic container which had some panels big enough. And I added some window tint we had lying around at home, but let me know if you have any other ideas for the lenses. I then tucked the lenses into the eye sockets under the top layer of foam. Once I was done and happy with everything, I attached the spine piece to the mask, and this is what the end results look like. Please let me know what you think.